Hi everyone, I'm the plant propagator and welcome to my channel. Today it's yet another beautiful morning here in Southwest Florida. It is 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 24 degrees Celsius. Nice wind, puffy clouds in the sky. It's just awesome and my orchids are loving it. Today I want to talk with you about something that is not really my area of specialization. I want to talk to you about Phalaenopsis. I've been giving local talks in this area in Southwest Florida on orchids and how to grow them, but you know, if they come from seed or divisions or how they're propagated. And you know, it's interesting, the last talk that I gave, I had people that brought in their orchids. They thought it was a diagnostic clinic, and they brought in their orchids, and everyone brought in their phals. You know, it's what most people start out with. The phals are, you know, you get at the big box stores, you get at Lowe's and Home Depot, Walmart, Trader Joe's. There's Phalaenopsis everywhere. They're beautiful plants. They're really easy to grow, and they're not the main plant that I grow, but I want to share some ideas with you based on the questions that I was asked. A lot of people brought in their phals and they said, "What's wrong with it?" And again, the majority of times, they brought in their phals, they showed it to me, and I said absolutely nothing is wrong with it. They look beautiful. What they're used to seeing, I guess, is, you know, really nice growth of the plants, all flush green leaves. And I've got some phals here that I want to show you. And I don't really put a lot of care into my phals, and it shows it. So my phals don't look that nice. But if you can tell from the plants that I've got growing here, they're putting out bloom spikes like crazy, and this is the most important thing. You know, the leaves should look nice. The one thing on phals that if you grow them outside, you don't want to have the phals upright so that water collects right in the growing point, and that leads to rot. It leads to some issues. But I'll show you my phals. The leaves on my phals. Well, I was going to say I'll show them to you in a second, but I'll show them to you right now. And the leaves on my phals don't look really good. So this plant that has a nice bloom spike on it that's coming out, that's just starting to bloom, this the plant itself just looks not that great, but it's flowering and it looks wonderful. You know, the flower, I'm going to turn this sideways, the plant is kind of growing sideways. This leaf, you can't tell, is just barely hanging on. The roots are all coming out of the pot. They're not really into the soil, and it doesn't look really good. Here's another one, again putting out a great bloom spike, but it's got one leaf on it. But look at the, you know, it's going to bloom like crazy. Let me show you if I can get it. This one, this is a pretty large one right here, and again, it's got it's got two large bloom spikes coming out of it, and each one of those has a number of different secondary bloom spikes coming out of it. But look at the plant itself. I mean, and this leaf right here is just, I mean, it's just barely, it's not hanging on that well, but it's doing okay. And so the plant itself, the main thing that you look for is the health of the youngest one or two leaves that are on the plant. And if they're coming out and they look, and it looks like you've got new growth, it looks like the leaves are nice, you're in pretty good shape. You've got, you know, your plant is fine. You know, orchids are tough, and they don't need much to, you know, to do well and to grow. Most of the people that showed me the phals, they were growing them inside their house, and the main concern about growing orchids in your house, especially when you buy them, you know, in containers like this, that is just a, you know, it's just a loose plastic container here. And a lot of times when you buy these things, they're in moss. The main problem is overwatering, and overwatering of the plant will lead to rot of the roots, and that's just not good. So the main thing is, you can water, if you have these plants inside your house, water it once a week with a small amount of water. If it drains, this has a drain hole. If it drains, that's fine. Just have the water run through, and then pour the rest of the water that drains through, throw it out so it doesn't sit in water for too long. But just a small amount, less depending on the size of the plant. A few tablespoons of water, quarter cup, 50 mils, something along those lines, is, depending on the size of the pot, is all the orchids need to grow. And so, it doesn't take too much for these things to grow well. The other thing is that if you're expecting your orchids just to continually bloom like the annuals that are outside of your house, they don't do that. They have flushes of blooms, and then they kind of back off. They grow really slow, and that's good in many cases, because they don't require exchange to a bigger pot really quickly. So you just need to kind of be patient, and what happens with the orchids is they'll rebloom. Sometimes just once a year, so you got to be patient, but then sometimes more often. And that brings me to the second question that people ask me. They are, it's interesting, a lot of people, they're really anxious. They want to care for their orchid, which is great. But if you care by watering your orchid, you will kill your orchid, with your Phalaenopsis orchid, with care. They don't want to be watered too much. They need to kind of dry out. They need to have a limited amount of water. And like I said before, you don't want to add so much water so that the water sits in there and then they rot. You don't want them constantly wet. They need to dry out in between waterings. But the other thing that they're concerned about as far as caring for them, they really want to cut off the dead flower spikes and the dead leaves. And what you really need to do is, well, it depends. It's your orchid. You do what you want with it. But we just passed Valentine's Day, and if you got a Valentine's Day orchid, that's great. Again, do what you want with it, but it doesn't need to be trimmed up whenever you see any kind of yellowing on the leaf, or when the flowers all fall off of the bloom spike. If you want to cut the thing off, that's fine. But what happens with the orchids and these types of orchids? So this is a good example here, and I'm going to show you these flowers don't look real good, and they may even have some fungal issues. But what happened on this, and this is old, but what happened on this is the original bloom spike was right up here at the top. And then these flowers are starting to fade, but the bloom spike is still green. And as long as it's still green, you can leave it on there. And then what will happen in a lot of cases is that your orchid will put out secondary bloom spikes. So, and this happens a lot. So it happened with this one. And then here's a nasty, look at this. Look at this. This is a bad looking orchid. I don't take care of my phals very much, so this put out, but look at this, so this put out the original bloom spike is right here. There's one flower left on this original bloom spike, but then it is put out from right here, it put out another bloom spike, and then from the main spike, it put out two more, and these will bloom also. So these things will continually bloom. Another case right here is that this bloom spike came out of this. One leaf left on this orchid. It had a bloom spike right that came to here, and I actually cut this off because it was browning. So if it's brown, if it's completely brown, sure, cut it off. But below where it was brown, it was still green, and then look what it did. It put out this bloom spike. It's got flowers on it here, and it's got a lot more flowers on it here. So these things, I don't really, I don't really over care for my Phalaenopsis orchids. They're not my favorite, but they continue to bloom. And these guys, they're going to put out just a flush of new blooms. All right, so that's all I want to say. If you have some nasty looking leaves like on this plant, I mean on this one right here, you got a brown spot. If this was a fungus, you would want to cut off right below, closer to the plant where the fungus is. But this is actually sun damage. This was an orchid that was just placed right. Phalaenopsis can't handle too much bright sun, and this was placed right out in the sun, so it scorched it here, it scorched this leaf right here, and it scorched the whole top of this leaf. And I didn't even cut it off cleanly. It just kind of tore off. But this plant's putting, it's fine. It's not fine. It's doing okay. But it's going to put out some more blooms. So, it's thriving under these conditions, doing okay. Now, what I'm going to get from these guys is you will get nice new green leaves growing out from the main growing point of this plant. You'll get new roots growing out. The other thing, as far as people ask me, is what should they do with all of the aerial roots that are growing out? And, for the most part, just leave them alone. They're not doing the plant really any good, because if you have them inside, because you should be watering the potting medium below. But if they're dried like this, yeah, cut off the dead stuff. Sure, that's okay. But don't be so anxious to cut off the dead stuff that you're actually cutting off the live stuff. The aerial roots don't do much good if it's inside. If it's outside and it's getting rainwater or it's being splashed in some way, the aerial roots will absorb water, and they're actually photosynthetic. So once you get the aerial roots wet, you'll see them turn green, and that indicates that you've got photosynthetic capabilities that are in those roots. A lot of orchids are like that. They have photosynthetic capabilities, so it contributes to the overall plant. So, if they bother you, if these aerial roots are all over the place and they bother you and they're going out so much so that they're getting into a pot next to it, well, okay, you can cut it off if you want. But for the most part, just kind of leave them alone and let them do what they do. If the living stuff, leave it alone. If it looks like it's dying from a fungal invasion, cut it off. And just kind of, care for your plants, but don't over care for your plants. Okay, so that's all I have for today. I just wanted to go over some of my, and show you some of my phals that don't really look great, and it's not the main orchid that I grow, but I wanted to share some information with you based on the questions that I've been receiving from some of the local talks that I've been presenting. Okay, if you liked what you saw today and you want to keep on seeing my videos, it would help me out if you can click on like, share, and subscribe to my channel. If you're not already a subscriber, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed my video, and happy propagating.